I'm Janet Morana, Executive Director of Priests for Life. Welcome to Just Ask Janet. Well, you might be saying, how can we get more and more young people involved in the pro-life movement? Well, if you were at the March for Life in Washington or the Walk for Life in San Francisco last week, you saw more and more young people are now involved. But how did that evolve over the decades? Well, joining me today is the head of our youth ministry at Priests for Life is Bryan Kemper, and he has a brand new book out called Pro-Life is the New Punk Rock, which is a history of the pro-life youth movement. And he's going to tell us all about the history of how did the youth movement evolve over the decades. So Bryan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Janet. I'm excited, and I'm gonna have to leave out some of the history so people get the book.
Of course, we can't give away the whole store.
No,
but enough to pique their interest to want to get the book.
absolutely.
So Bryan, going back to your own story, you had a very terrifying experience
Yes.
that changed your life. Tell us about that.
Janet, as you know, I was raised in Southern California, living on the streets, drugs, quite a few pretty bad situations in my childhood. And in 1987, I went to a Grateful Dead Bob Dylan concert at Anaheim Stadium in California, where I ended up overdosing on LSD, meth, cocaine, shrooms, all in one day. And I ended up in the hospital. The nurses had been pouring charcoal water down my throat to clear the poison of the drugs out of my body. I was hallucinating. I was in bad shape. And it was a doctor in that hospital who got me to come outside and talk to him. And I write a lot about this in the book. But basically, this is the man who shared the good news of Christ with me. I had always thought that God hated me because of the life that I lived. And this man talked to me about how much God loved me. And that was the catalyst that brought me out of that lifestyle and into Christ.
Okay, so now, you became a believer. But then what was the catalyst that got you into the pro-life movement? I mean, there's plenty of people who believe in Jesus Christ out there.
Yes.
And they still support abortion. I always say if everyone professed belief in Jesus Christ would denounce abortion, we would change this whole game immediately. So for you, first you became a Christian, but then how did you get awakened to the slaughter of all these babies?
Well, Janet, I think it was a process. And the first process was about a week after I became a Christian. I went to go see a punk rock band called The Crucified. This was the kind of music that I loved. I love the hard rock and punk rock and such. I like all music, but really into that. And there was this band in the 80s called The Crucified, who were a bunch of young Christian kids who started a punk rock band to reach their friends. And I was at their show and they sang a song called The Silent Scream. And I remember it just really kind of pricked at my conscience. And I went over to their booth, and the drummer's girlfriend, who's now his wife, explained to me about the Silent Scream film and how the baby literally was screaming for help when Dr. Nathanson was making that video. And that was really what got me to start thinking about abortion and pro-life. I remember getting the cassette tape and playing it on my Walkman every single day, just listening to that over and over. And that was the very first push that got me to start talking to people and asking about pro-life.
Well, and for people who don't know who Dr. Nathanson was basically the founder of the National Abortion Federation. He helped found the abortion issue. Basically, he was an abortionist from New York. Abortion was legal in New York State even before Roe v. Wade, and he was the architect of this whole thing. And he later had a conversion around the time ultrasound became available, and he saw that unborn child. And the film you're referring to, The Silent Scream, was where Dr. Nathanson saw on the ultrasound a baby being destroyed by abortion, being pulled arms and legs out. And it dramatically changed him. And he made that film, which, as you know, to this day, so many people have seen that silent scream, which has changed hearts and minds. Okay, so now you're convicted. I got to get involved in the pro-life movement. What made you, because the pro-life movement, Brian, as we know, is made up of a lot of facets. We have the pregnancy help part of the movement, the legal part, the people who work on legislature, the abortion recovery part of the movement. But you chose to get involved in activism, the activism of the pro-life movement. What drew you to that?
Well, Janet, the very first event I went to, I was actually invited to a men's prayer breakfast by a friend of mine in a band called Precious Death. And after that, we went, it was Holy Week, and we went down to downtown Los Angeles, where there was a rescue going on. And I ended up getting arrested at that first event, but got out of that. And once I saw that the pro-aborts surrounding the abortion mill and them escorting people into the mill, I started asking friends. I'm like, this is something I need to get involved with. And it grew from there.
Wow. And when we talk about the activism part of the movement, so everyone, again, understands the terminology, we always consider the activism part of the movement are people like, for example, who are outside sidewalk counseling in front of the abortion clinics. The rescue movement, that was from the 80s and 90s, and that really doesn't happen too much anymore. But the activists are people who bring the message of abortion out onto the street. So there's Face the Truth tours, there's sidewalk counseling and all that. So from that activism, you said earlier you were very involved in Christian music. And so what made you establish it again now, Rock for Life? Because that was the next phase that you went into.
Well, Janet, that came from a day of rescues where I was undercover in an abortion mill in downtown Los Angeles near MacArthur Park. And this was a day that I was doing what we called a truth team, where I took a young girl in, and she would go into the back room. She'd ask for a pregnancy test, and I would sit in the lobby next to the magazine racks. And I would pick up one magazine at a time and put pro-life literature, sidewalk counseling literature into the magazines. Well, this particular day, Janet, she was in the back for a long time, and I got worried that she got caught as she was trying to put pro-life literature in the abortion rooms in different places. And I walked up to the front, and that's when the door to the abortion room swung open, and I saw a young girl on a table. And I can picture her, Janet. I literally can picture her looking, tears rolling out of her eyes as that abortion took place. And I went home that night, and I cried out to God in the shower. I just cried out to God. And I heard a voice, a literal audible voice say, "Brian, save my children." And that's the moment that God gave me the vision for Rock for Life. And I was there working with Jeff White of Survivors Now, and told him the idea. He loved it. And that's how we launched what we thought was going to be just a concert, just a couple hundred kids coming to see a few punk bands, and turned into this launching of this youth pro-life movement with Rock for Life.
And so, Brian, and by the way, brothers and sisters, we're talking to Bryan Kemper. He is the head of our youth ministry here at Priest for Life. And we're talking about the brand new book that we just launched for Brian called Pro-Life is the New Punk Rock, a history of the pro-life youth movement here in America. I like the cover, especially, Brian. It's that edgy. I know you like that edgy look to things, don't you?
Absolutely. You know, Jen, I was a little worried when I first pitched that cover, but you liked it. And I was super happy about it. Yeah, I do like the edgy stuff because I like to reach a lot of people sometimes that other people don't reach, Janet. You know,
Right.
And that's something like you and I, we've talked about certain gifts that God's given me, the gift of gab. Like whenever we ride in an Uber, you always like me to sit in the front because you know I'm going to have a conversation about Jesus and about pro-life with that Uber driver. So this is sort of my thing. This is the kind of people I want to reach. And I felt like that was the best title. And And it means more than that, Janet, because punk rock, a lot of people think is just a style of music, but it was sort of like a going against the system, going against the grain. And really now pro-life is going against the grain and going against the system. It's very punk rock to be pro-life.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And so Rock for Life went on for a few decades of these concerts. And I think they were chapters, right, all over the country. And the local chapter would try to put on, especially in the summertime, right, when kids had more time on their hands, a Christian rock band kind of concert. And then you'd have plenty of pro-life literature and swag there to help educate them about the humanity of the unborn child. So tell us a little bit about some of these chapters and the success of those concerts.
Well, Janet, after the first concert, which was in Aliso Viejo, California, MTV had done a piece on it. A baby got saved that night at the concert. A girl that was scheduled for an abortion was at that first concert and ended up changing her mind and keeping her baby. And some of my friends who were there all the way from Arizona took and started the next Rock for Life concert was in Arizona, and they became a chapter, and it started growing from there. I went on tour with Lollapalooza, which was the largest secular concert tour in the world at that point. And I was doing a pro-life booth right in between ACT UP and Rock for Choice and Planned Parenthood and all the little groups, and then me in that little pro-life booth with literature. And that was how that got started, and then started building off with chapters and then doing the Christian music festival tours. And even when I first joined Priests for Life, and before that, we would often, our summer tour, our van and trailer with all our interns would meet up with you and Father Frank at like National Right to Life events and other events. We were working together even before I joined Priests for Life, doing these kind of work to reach the young people.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's been a great time. I know we've had together, you being on board with the ministry. And, I can remember when you were deciding to come on board with us. And, I was just glad to really have you with us. Now, there was another story in your book that I thought quite interesting. You talk about a deep gratitude for the band Green Day. Can you just tell us about that?
Well, the gratitude, it's funny because they helped us not really wanting to help us. This was when we got invited on tour with Lollapalooza. This was 1994. And we were, I believe, in Dallas, Texas, setting up our booth for the first day that we were on the tour. And as we set up, we noticed all the other groups around us. They didn't let any of the fans in for the concert yet. It was just the bands and the people setting up in the nonprofit area and the booths. And this young man skateboarded up to my booth and basically threatened to pee on me. And when I asked him his name, he said, "My name is Billy Joe Armstrong. I'm in a band called Green Day." And this is when they first got super popular. Their album had just exploded, and people were there to see him. And I challenged him. I said, "Hey, if you disagree with me so much that you want to pee on me, why don't you take me on stage and debate me in front of the whole crowd, 20,000 people?" And he said no, but he took some of our literature and he took it up on the stage. And I remember him walking by one of the pro-choice groups and saying, "Watch what I do." And he ended up ripping our literature up on the stage and told the crowd to beat us up and destroy our booth. And so I ran back to the booth, and my three friends that were with me, we stood there. And as the crowd came around the corner, Janet, all of a sudden we noticed people saying things like, "Well, I kind of agree with them," or "Really? Is that what an abortion looks like?" Because we had pictures of the aborted babies, the images of those children that have been killed in abortion. We had notebooks with the pictures and different stuff. And Janet, before we got to this show, we had literally run out of money. We had $6 left to our name. We had pro-life literature, a car, and $6. And we had to do this tour for a month. And because of what Billy Joe did, we were not allowed to sell anything in our booth, but we could put a little donation thing. And by the time that crowd left, we had hundreds of dollars in donations in our bucket. And I remember the first thing we did is eat, because we hadn't eaten since the night before. But we were able to do that and get donations almost every night, enough to cover for us to have gas and food and pick up pro-life literature at different pro-life offices as we traveled the country, and we're able to set up in front of over 20,000 people every day for a month.
Wow, that's great. Well, brothers and sisters, we're talking to Bryan Kemper. He's the head of our youth outreach here at Priests for Life about the brand new book that we're just releasing called Pro-Life is the New Punk Rock, a history of the Youth Prolife Movement. It's available at our online store at prolifeproducts.org. Please go there and get a copy. You'll learn a lot about the pro-life movement as it has evolved. And, Bryan, I've noticed, like you have, more and more young people, are, excuse me, pro-life. There's all these sayings of, I survived Roe v. Wade, will not survive me. We are the pro-life generation. There's all those youthful expressions. But why do you think young people now, more so than a couple generations ago, are so instinctively pro-life? Like, why? Is it now that, the March for Life is mostly young people and few people left that are with gray hair marching? It's all young people. Why is it so easy for so many young people to automatically yeah, I'm pro-life? Why?
Well, Janet, I think there's several reasons. One of them, like I said, pro-life is sort of the punk rock thing to be, is going against the grain, going against the system, which young people have done that forever. But I think also with today's technology and today's science and the knowledge that we have, and Janet, to be honest, some of the great shoulders that we stand on, the Joe Scheidlers, Father Frank, Nellie Gray, Judy Brown, all of these people who have put so much time, you at Priests for Life have put so much effort into providing resources and education, that young people now are coming up with the truth. They know the truth. They've seen the ultrasounds. They've seen the 3D ultrasounds. They know about biology. They're learning this. And quite frankly, they're tired of being lied to. They're tired of this false narrative where it's okay to kill another human being. And I think as we look at even different aspects of the social justice movements that are going on in this world today, is when I coined the phrase, social justice begins in the womb. We have a generation of young people that do want to do justice. They do want to do things against injustices. And one of the greatest injustices for this generation is abortion.
Right. Well, of course, Bryan, in your work with the youth over these decades, I know one thing that some of the young people struggle with is that they're instinctively and they're actively pro-life. They join their pro-life maybe a group at their high school or college, but they have a mom who's pro-abortion. And there's this right in under the same roof
Absolutely.
there, these opposite views. And what can you say to young people who are watching right now who say, yeah, my mom, and they roll their eyes, yeah, my mom, she's pro-choice. What suggestion do you give these kids to deal with their own parent who doesn't see the humanity of the unborn child?
It's something I had to deal with too. A lot of my family is not pro-life. But Janet, and this is something that actually really came out to me in the 90s when I was touring the music festivals and selling the original pro-life t-shirts that I would make. I would have young people come up and buy a t-shirt like "Abortion is Mean" or different, shirts that we had. And they would come up to me the next year and say, "Oh my gosh, I wore this at home. And then I found out that I've lost a sibling to an abortion." And that was something that ended up becoming something beautiful, because we were able to get those young people literature about Rachel's Vineyard, which is our post-abortion healing ministry here at Priests for Life. And a lot of those young people were able to help their parents go through the healing that they needed. But it is true. A lot of, and again, it comes back to pro-life being the new punk rock. A lot of times kids kind of go opposite of what their parents are. And right now we are seeing that, where so many young people are bucking what their parents say about choice and saying, no, this is killing a baby, and we don't believe in that. And that's just another reason for the title, Pro-Life is the New Punk Rock. And we're excited too, Janet, because as you know, we're going to be launching soon, along with the book, a new website that's going to be full of ways for young people to get involved. Our team at Priest for Life, we have an amazing team with our web designer and our artists and such. And we've been working even this morning, putting together different pages of that new website to give young people ways that they can get involved.
Right. And what would you say, is the immediate future? I mean, as you know, right now we hear a lot of talk about the Dobbs case out of Mississippi, and we had the oral arguments in the Supreme Court. We're all waiting on tender hooks for a decision, and of course, this year at the March for Life, phrases like "dismantle Roe," "Roe's going to go." What do you think the young people are feeling right now? Again, they're newer in the movement than you and I. I've been doing this for 32 years or more, but what's the feeling that we're going to finally possibly dismantle Roe?
Absolutely, Janet. Actually, I was sitting down with a big group of young people recently, and they started asking me some stories about the past of the pro-life movement. And building upon what they're doing, it was so excited to see that they're looking at different forms of activism and different ways to get involved. And when we were out at the Supreme Court on December 1st for the arguments of the Dobbs v. Jackson, the amount of young people that were just going crazy, like in a loving way, chanting and singing and praying. I really believe, and Janet, you and I both know that just because Dobbs v. Jackson goes our way, that doesn't mean we're close to the end. We may be close to the end of the Roe era, but the battle is going to continue as it goes back to the states, and then we try to build this country on a culture of life and never have to fight. But right now, the liberals aren't going to back down. So we need to, as Father Frank always says, redouble and re-triple our efforts. And one of the things that we're doing with that is building this youth movement and this youth outreach at Priest for Life.
That's right. Well, and with all that, said, depending on what state you live in, you're watching this program. In some states like New York and California, Illinois, Vermont, they've already passed laws saying that abortion will be legal in their state up to birth. Up to birth. I mean, picture that, a woman who's in her 9th month of pregnancy, the baby's about ready to be born. She changes her mind and says, you know what, let's have an abortion. This is how far they've gotten. But then there's other states, like, for example, Louisiana has already passed a law that says when Roe v. Wade is overturned, abortion will be 100% illegal in our state. That's Louisiana's one example. In other states are beginning to pass similar laws. And of course, we have the beautiful heartbeat bill in Texas that's protecting babies as soon as you can hear a heartbeat, which occurs around 6 weeks, when they can actually detect that heartbeat. And what's great about the heartbeat bill, Brian, is it has an enforcement. It has teeth to it, that
Yes.
the average person can report an abortion clinic if they see the fact that they're breaking that law. So I think the answer here is that everyone has to get involved. The fight will not be over. But, one final question I want to ask you is, okay, people are watching the program, and I'm holding up this book telling them about the pro-lifers new punk rock, and someone says, what do I care about the history of the youth pro-life movement? I don't even have any teenagers anymore. They're all grown and married, and I got grandkids. What can people learn from reading your book?
Well, Janet, people have come to hear me speak. I speak all over the world, and people want to know my life story, which I've added in the book. So just hearing what God has done in my life and how he brought me out of that horrible pit, as it says in Psalm 40, verse 2, he lifted me up out of a horrible pit of mud and miry clay and set my feet upon a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. But on top of that, Janet, I go through lots of different pro-life arguments, different things in this book. It's a compliment, honestly, Janet, to our family of books. As you see, I have my book here next to this amazing book everyone should also read, Recall Abortion, and we have Oceans of Blood, Rivers of Blood, Oceans of Mercy by Kevin Burke. It's part of a complete understanding of this pro-life movement. And if you want to get involved, if you're going to get involved, This is just another aspect that you need to know about. And you never know when you're going to run into a young person that you could say, hey, here's a way for you to get involved. Check out this book. So I encourage everyone, not just my book, but all the books we have at Priests for Life help paint a total picture of ways that people can get involved and different things they can do in this movement.
And of course, people can get Bryan's book and the other books he mentioned from our ministry at prolifeproducts.org. Hey, you know, Bryan, you got some pretty good endorsements for the books. Tell us about some of your endorsements, okay?
Well, I was absolutely thrilled that the foreword was written by Father Frank, which even though I work with Father Frank and I talk to him almost on a daily basis, it's a huge honor for me that he would take the time to write that foreword for the book. I have Jonathan Van Maren, who's the premier pro-life activist in Canada, Brandy Swindell, who was my first intern when I started Rock for Life, and she now runs Stanton Healthcare. I have Jason Jones, one of the biggest pro-life podcasters in the world. It's exciting that so many people that I look up to have said, hey, yeah, this is a book that you should read. And so it just means a lot to me. And I know I like you, there's so many people I could have added into that, but we do have some amazing people that did that.
Yeah. Well, Bryan, thank you for joining us for this lively discussion today. And I hope everyone rushes to our online store at prolifeproducts.org and gets a copy of your new book. So thanks for joining us, Bryan.
Absolutely. Thank you. And when you get the book, pick up a t-shirt too.
Okay. Well, brothers and sisters, as you heard, Bryan Kemper really poured his heart out in this book. You'll learn a lot about the pro-life movement, and it will give you some great hints, also how to discuss the issue. Go to our online store at prolifeproducts.org, where, as Bryan said, in addition to great books, we have some great t-shirts too. So for now, until next time, this is Janet Miranda, the Executive Director of Priests for Life. Thank you for joining me on Just Ask Janet. God bless.
I will be silent no more.